The war in Ukraine is not just a regional conflict, it's a seismic event reshaping the global landscape, impacting everything from energy prices and supply chains to the future of democracy. Delta Analytics explores the far-reaching consequences of the war, examining its effects on geopolitics, economics, and our interconnected world. Join us as we delve into the conflict's ripple effects and analyze how it's shaping our world. At Delta Analytics, we often explore global trends through data, but today we focus on the human stories behind the numbers. Yanina Kisler's book, They Were Fighters: Oral Histories of Jews Leaving the Soviet Union, unveils a powerful and personal look at a pivotal historical event. This matters profoundly in today's geopolitics. It reminds us of the fundamental human desire for freedom and self-determination, echoing struggles we see globally. Understanding their courage, resilience, and pursuit of a better life offers vital context for today's movements of people and the drivers of displacement.
Hello, everybody. Today we have a guest with us, Yanina Kisler, author of historical book, History of a Jewish Immigration from Soviet Union between 1970s through 1990s. The book called They Were Fighters and currently available on Amazon. It's an interesting piece of body of work that I'm part of it as part of this immigration. We had the previous discussions with Yanina, and some of us, our experiences may be different, but vast majority of things that we talked about is the same. And we thought that it would be great to share this discussion with with all of you. So welcome, and we will start. Yanina, can you start by kind of putting a background on why you wrote this book? When did you write? When did you get an idea? Why did you get the idea to write this book? Because, and it's a little about me. For me, the immigration was a natural thing. It's like everybody I know here did it. Over there, when we were leaving, that was a bit of a hairy process, but that was, as we say in America, it is what it is. But never thought to me that that was something that needs to be commemor commemorated or recorded, or because it was life. And to me, it was a natural thing that everybody I knew went through.
Absolutely. So first of all, hello, and thank you for having me on your podcast. My parents and I immigrated from the Soviet Union in 1977, and we came to the US in 1978. I finished high school here. I studied electrical engineering and physics at Boston University. I got my master's in electrical engineering from MIT. I worked as an engineer for 35 years. So I had a perfectly normal life. I'm married. My husband and I have 2 children and 3 little grandchildren now. We're competitive ballroom dancers. We have been US champions and world semifinalists. So it's been a very fortunate life. My parents passed away within the last 10 years. And a few years ago, I started thinking back to this immigration, and a couple of things occurred to me. So first of all, it occurred to me that people who have done it themselves, who led that immigration starting in the 70s, they're getting old. My parents' generation, and they're passing, and very often their stories have not been shared with the children and grandchildren for whatever reason. So that was one thing. Secondly, it occurred to me that immigration was unusual. It did not follow the same pattern as typical migrations that we know about. So it was sort of very interesting. And it occurred to me that I really, since these people will go away pretty soon, and so will firsthand experience of life in the Soviet Union and reasons for immigration, that I should preserve their stories. And I set out to interview 120 people who immigrated at that time. And the result is this book that you mentioned, which is called They Were Fighters, Oral Histories of Jews Leaving the Soviet Union. And the book is basically interviews with people in their own words, how they lived there and why they left. In addition, it also has historical background to, sort of to learn where, how this experience fits into the world and Russian Empire and Soviet Union history. And so the book is available on Amazon, as you said. The book is fabulous, by the way, if I say so myself, which I
It
do.
shows the cover, so we
Isn't
can
it?
all see how it looks.
Oh, okay. Looks like that.
And are these your family photos? Or...
It's a mix. It actually has myself in it and my parents.
Nice.
And some other people that we knew that I got pictures of. So that was sort of the reason for starting to do this was to collect the stories of people. And as I was collecting them, I was struck by this something that was repeated again and again by people, that their children are not listening to their stories, grandchildren are not interested, and often there's a language barrier. And they really felt that their stories have not been told. And as I said, the book is fabulous, which is, of course, a self-serving statement, but the stories really are amazing and really something that we can learn from, and certainly the next generation, I hope, can learn from. And so that was the reason for writing this book.
So, well, you were saying that you lived a normal life, and it may be normal to you. Like I was saying, my life seemed normal to me, but very few of us can put on our resume MIT or ballroom dancing, and especially being a champion of the United States. And definitely coming to America, this gave us, and myself included, vast or vast amount of opportunity, like breadth of opportunity. I don't know if it's even a proper word. I'm still learning English all these years later, that were unthinkable for us or for me when I was growing up back in the USSR. Where are you from? In
We came from Kharkov. Kharkov, right? It's Soviet Ukraine, easternmost part of it, Russian speaking.
Yeah, I was there last year, and I'm from Kiev, also from Ukraine. When we came here, and people ask me who are you, where are you from? I said Russia. It was easier to this way. Nobody knew where Ukraine was. Now with the war,
everybody knows.
It's easier to be more specific. But then my friends go like, "Well, you said that you were Russian." I said, "Well, you didn't know Ukraine." But especially in Kharkiv, well, you, I think you're a year younger than me. I don't know if you were aware of it or not, but back then, what city you are also determined what your future might be, because moving from city to city was difficult, and getting into the school or college or university was, especially for Jews, was difficult. But if you're out of town, even more difficult. So
in my book, I talk to people about their lives in the Soviet Union, what it was like for them as children in school, trying to get into college, workplace, just sort of regular life, how much they knew about Judaism. And it definitely varied city by city. It varied, for example, people from Western Ukraine or Central Asia, they knew more about Judaism, and they knew more about Israel and had more of a connection to Israel, largely because those regions, some of those regions did not become part of the Soviet Union until 1940s as a result of the Second World War, or Great Patriotic War, as it was called there. In some regions, religion was not quite as suppressed as it was in the big centers in Ukraine or Russia.
Yeah, very true. And
Mhm.
those republics and those areas that you just mentioned, they had their own non-Jewish population that were resisting Russification or Sovietization, and they were sympathetic to the plight of Jews. So Jews
Mm.
were able to. Well, we can discuss and
We can
certainly
discuss,
share
absolutely.
our knowledge. But my understanding of the experiences that I had or what I heard, probably what I heard would be by and large more accurate, is that the non-Jews, like for example, Western Ukraine, Catholics and Orthodox, understood why Jews needed to follow or preserve their traditions, their religions, so forth. I heard the stories about World War II from when my family was evacuated. My family was evacuated, direct family, to Siberia, Ural. But parts of my family, more distant, were in southern republics that were not occupied by Germans. So they shared their experience.
Mhm,
That's what I know.
mhm.
That's all I can share.
Right. So when I started out collecting those stories, my own perception, as you said, and what I heard from every single person I talked to was, "Oh, we were like everybody else." Well, you know the stories. We were like everybody,
Right.
and I thought everybody was like us because you always think everybody's like us. And what I discovered was how much difference there was in people's lives, in people's view of themselves as Jews, of religion, to whatever very little extent they knew
Mhm.
about Judaism, views towards Israel, views towards the Soviet system, and how much they varied. I mean, it ranged everywhere from, and including in Ukraine and Western Ukraine and Baltic republics, which were
Mhm.
in general a little more liberal. But a lot of people, they grew up being ardent communists. Other people grew up being very much anti-communist. Some people knew nothing about being Jewish other than they are Jewish. Some people actually knew something about not just Jewish holidays, but about keeping kosher. I actually interviewed a couple of people who were fully religious in the Soviet Union, which
Mhm.
was pretty amazing. Their main
Mhm.
concern was not getting into universities, but rather how to keep children from the authorities taking them and putting them in orphanages because their parents were observing Sabbath and
Mhm.
observing Jewish laws. So that varied tremendously. And even within different pockets within Western Ukraine or Belarus, the views varied. In some cities, Jews were they were the only family there, a Jewish family there. The attitudes to Jews on the street, and we're talking 1970s,
Mhm.
was sort of approaching, and somebody said, it wasn't quiet pogroms, but it was getting there.
Mhm.
Whereas in other places, I've heard stories of Western Ukrainians giving Jews higher grades on the admission test in order to spite the Russians.
Mhm.
So there was every single permutation and combination of,
And
of attitudes towards the Jews, of how Jews viewed themselves and viewed their surrounding. They were quite fascinating,
if
fascinating differences.
if I could add, and
Mhm.
that's not even from family to family, it's even within the family. For example,
Oh yeah, oh yeah. There were very sad stories that I've heard. If I can jump right into the immigration process.
well,
Of
yeah,
what,
before you do that,
okay.
I was just wanted to
Mhm,
share kind of curious anecdote.
mhm,
My great grandmother, which I was lucky to to be raised by. When I was a child, she lived till 93. She saved our family, or her side of the family. Actually, she met Father Mahno, and he during a civil war, they were starving, and Mahno's soldiers took her last sack of bread, and she came with 4 children. Uh, Out of 6 she had total, hid her husband in the house, cellar, and just came to Mahno and said, just shoot us down, mow us down. It would be kind thing to do, because you took all we had to eat. This is winter. We're going to starve to death. Do us a kind thing, kill us. And she's told us the story that Mahno's girlfriend, she thinks, help her by playing off, um, playing, pushing Mahno's buttons. And she told him, don't give her anything. And he said, you're not the boss of me. You're not going to tell me anything, and gave her bread. So they were able to survive. One of those children later on was very staunch communist, and gave all the silverware, the last things, to Stalin for war, for a victory. And we have no heirlooms left from the pre-war time. And later, back in the fast forward to the 70s, that was one of the persons who was instrumental in us moving to America. The same person.
Yeah, no, it's
things.
pretty amazing. See, that's why those stories need to be preserved, because even though to us they seem perfectly normal.
Like, didn't everybody have the same thing? Well,
No.
that's what my mind said.
Well, and that's very natural, I'm sure. As I said, we always think that everybody's like us and our lives are like everybody else's.
We're not different, right?
No, it was very different, and that was quite a fascinating thing to see the differences there. It was a very strange emigration.
It was. And I'm kind of curious that you lumped in my mind, 2 immigrations that was vastly different. For example, 70s, early 70s to maybe early 80s, it was one migration. But in the 90s, after the Soviet Union fell apart, that was different.
Very good observation, which is why I do not lump them together.
Oh, I'm sorry. My fault.
So the book is focused on the immigration of 1970s and 80s, before the Soviet Union fell apart, because that's a very much a correct observation. The typical models for immigration, as they're viewed in general in the world, is push and pull. So push refers to conditions in the home country that are bad: wars, famine, natural disasters, and people fleeing. Pull refers to good conditions in another country, perhaps economic opportunities or better cultural environment, and people are drawn to that. But what happened in the 70s and 80s, it was just those 20 years. What happened was something strange, because Jews in the Soviet Union, even though maybe they were uncomfortable, but they were not in danger. They were not being threatened. They were not starving. Life was sort of okay. And they knew nothing about the West, where they were going. The country was very closed. Information was not getting in. And so people knew nothing about what's going on outside the Soviet Union. And yet, we had 1/3 Jews, 330,000, which is actually quite a few, in the 70s and 80s, who gave up everything they had, what they worked for their whole lives. They gave it up, and they went into the complete unknown. And if you think about it, it just does not happen like that in the world, that people don't give up a stable life to go into something they know nothing about. But as you correctly pointed out, as Soviet Union fell apart, so 1990 and later, that became a very standard push and pull immigration. Namely, at that point, there were threats of pogroms. There were nationalistic groups rising up in Russia and Ukraine and Lithuania, threatening Jews with attacks, and the economy was falling apart. So there was a very real push. And now people knew a lot more about the West, about Israel, about America. They knew what to expect pretty much. They knew how previous immigrants have done well and succeeded. And so there was a pull. So it became sort of a very standard immigration. But for those 20 years, the 70s and 80s, it was not a pull or push. It was something rather different, which is why I thought this was interesting to sort of preserve that and to teach the next generation about that.
I think this is a good time for us to make a little pause,
Okay.
and we will get back for that part two shortly.
Okay.
Are you ready to dive into a powerful and gripping true story? Then you must check out They Were Fighters by Yanina Kisler. This incredible book is an oral history of Jewish people leaving the Soviet Union, told in their own words. It's a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring human spirit. They Were Fighters by Yanina Kisler is now available on Amazon. Don't miss out. Click that link and get your copy today.
Hello, everybody. We're back with Yanina Kisler, the author of the book They Were Fighters, available on Amazon, released last year. Definitely check it out. A very interesting book. So we will continue. From the last episode, last portion, we ended on the difference between 70s, 80s immigration from the 90s immigration. Me being part of the late 70s immigration and being from Kiev, I have a slightly different experience.
Okay.
Because ever since I remember myself, high school, not high school, even first grade, I remember coming home, crying, all in tears, and my mom asked me why am I in tears, and I said, well, kids in school were telling me that I'm a Jew, but I'm not a Jew. I'm a Russian. Why did they say that
I
I'm
did
a
that.
Jew?
I did that also.
You did?
Yeah,
And she said, how did you find out that you're a Jew? I'm going like, well, there is a roster that my teacher has, and
right.
against each name, there is a nationality of
Right.
each person. And for me, it says Jew. How can I be a Jew? I speak Russian. I don't speak Jewish language. And then my mom said, well, we didn't want to, upset you, but yes, we're Jews.
Mhm.
So ever since that day, that there was always something that would come up that tell me that I'm different. I'm
Mhm.
not Ukrainian. I'm not Russian. I don't belong here. I'm a Jew. Whatever you're doing here. And when I got into the fourth grade through about seventh or eighth grade,
Mhm.
I was beat up on a daily basis. No, seriously. Every day, somebody pick a fight with me, beat me to a bloody pulp. I went through the uniforms. We used to have uniforms back then. Through the year, I would go through 3, 4 uniforms because they would be torn up, messed up during the fights. When I got older, I got friends who were non-Jewish, and we had a little gang going on. So I got the protection, but I always knew that I was different, and I always was looking for a way to get out. And then when the war was between China and Vietnam, when it started, I think it was 77 or 76 actually, and there was a agreement between Vietnam and Soviet Union that the Soviet Union will back them up in any conflict, where my family goes like, our child is going to be eligible for a draft. We don't want for him to fight some war. So we started thinking about him leaving. So that was our impetus. And during my time of immigrating, there was 2 people who were killed because they were immigrating. So maybe it was not a mass pogrom, but where I was, there was definitely, threat of bodily harm. So I mean, but it may not be typical.
It's so I view the experiences of people that I talk to, I view it as a tapestry. So you definitely fit into that tapestry. The idea that children were not told that they're Jewish, that was fairly common, and children finding out that they're Jewish from anti-Semites on the streets who would walk by and call them dirty Jew face, that was fairly common also. So that's that we're right in the middle of the distribution.
Or call them French if they're being.
Didn't get that. That's okay.
Well, instead of calling you a Jew, they'll call you look French. Like from France?
I never heard that. That I never heard. Yes, there were also some children who knew early on they were Jewish. They were told. And for some of them, they were beaten up, and there were stories of kids going, especially boys, joining karate or judo or martial arts classes so they could defend themselves. There was story of others who would let other kids, the non-Jews, copy their homeworks and therefore avoid being beaten up that way. So there were stories every which way.
Right.
Right. And of course, the family members who were communist, and there were quite a few of those, endless fights between family members of how could you possibly think Stalin was anything but a complete criminal, to how can you possibly think that Stalin was anything but a great hero.
And
so
in Soviet Union, if you are not member of Communist Party or Komsomol member, you do not get advanced in your career. So you had to become a member of the party, even if you didn't believe in it.
So that was sometimes true. Sometimes people avoided getting into the party. There was a mix. There was, as I said, every combination of people trying to survive.
Yeah.
If it meant, becoming a member of the party because that way at least you had a job. Absolutely.
Exactly.
If you could avoid becoming a member because you had a job and you could rise to some degree, maybe without being a Communist Party member, you did that. Which does not say that one was better than the other or one was smarter than the other. People were trying to survive.
Exactly, that's what it is.
So that was, whatever it took. So there are very interesting stories there. The one you started talking about the parents or the family members being different, having different views on immigration. I wanted to tell a story, if that's okay.
By all means.
And there were many stories that people have told me that were, I was going to say amazing if they weren't so horrible. But that particular story was, the immigration process, I don't know how much I should get into it, but immigration from the Soviet Union was not allowed, starting from 1920s when Soviet Union became Soviet Union. Immigration, by definition, is people trying to make their own lives better, which goes against the socialist and communist and the group mentality of those countries, of the Soviet Union. And so anybody who wanted to emigrate immediately became the enemy of the people. And so that went on until 1960s, at which point, after the 6-Day War, Soviet Jews woke up, was the term that was used by a number of people, and started to demand the right to move to Israel, at which point also Soviet Union had a shortage of grain, as it often did, and needed to import grain from the West, and the United States made the sale of grain to the Soviet Union conditional on the Soviet Union observing some human rights. Among them was the right to emigrate as part of the family reunification accord. And so, as very, very grudging concession on the part of the Soviet government, limited, difficult immigration of Soviet Jews to Israel was allowed. And
If I may interject,
mhm.
I think, well, you rightfully pointed out we lived in jail. The entire Eastern Bloc lived in jail, but
Very
Soviet
much so.
Union was even more of a jail, and nobody could move
Mhm.
within the country, let alone going out of the country. The only thing that always struck me odd that, well, two things, um, that we call it immigration. It was not an immigration. It was pretty much running. We were running from there.
Oh, it was
But
done legally. We
it
did
was
not, right, we did not cross the countries or borders illegally,
right
right?
because immigration implies that there is some civility to the process. Here it was you leave everything behind, you leave with what you can get, and most people left with clothes on their back, more or less.
So, I
But
guess I would somewhat disagree. We certainly were trying to get out, but there was a process. It was a horrible process, but there was a process. So we did, we left by the rules.
well, yeah,
We
there
did
was a
not,
process. Auschwitz was a process too, but
well, yes, it was,
it was a
absolutely,
very ugly
absolutely.
process.
And we were fortunate that, thank God, we were not part of that process.
Right, right.
But right, but nonetheless, but the story I wanted to tell was that as part of the immigration process, you needed to submit gazillion papers, of course, and documents.
Yeah.
But one of them was your parents had to give you permission to emigrate. And regardless of your age, you could be 40 years old, but you needed your parent permission that said, yes, I will allow them to emigrate. Which of course, in some cases, resulted in terrible stories. And so one of them was, it was a family. They were probably in their mid-30s. They decided to emigrate. This was in the late 70s, so sort of your time period. And they applied, and they needed parental permission. Mother signed, and father refused. Father was an ardent communist, and he was also in charge of psychiatric hospital in the city. And so he told the son that the son must be a schizophrenic because only a schizophrenic would abandon the country that has done so much for them. And he threatened to put him in the mental institution. And this went on for 2 years. The family, of course, they lost their jobs immediately upon applying to leave, and were literally on the verge of starvation. He got a job as a loader in some cafeteria, and was able to get some food from there. And they had to, limit how much they ate, and they were literally starving, or just about. And finally, the mother told the father that if he didn't sign, she will kill him, and she meant it. And he did.
I have two stories in my family just like that.
Just like that. Yeah, they were pretty horrible stories.
Yeah, but one story is my aunt
Okay.
divorced her husband and she was leaving in 73.
Mhm.
She basically had to buy out her daughter. She paid for permission out.
Yeah, that
And
was common.
myself, when I was leaving,
Mhm.
my classmate in musical college or college of music, she and her family wanted to leave. They were not Jewish.
Uh-huh.
And they said, well, if you marry my daughter, we will sponsor your immigration. So I
Right.
went to my mom and I said, Mom, I need for you to give me a permission. I'm going to leave with this family. And my mom said, well, we didn't know how you would react to it, but we're in the process of immigrating
Mhm.
ourselves. And we have a papers that would cover you as well.
Mhm.
And
How
I'm
old were you when that was happening?
17,
How old?
16,
Oh, 16. Uh-huh.
16. And I honestly, I feel guilty to this day that I didn't help that family to leave Soviet Union.
Mhm.
And I had to, it was kind of, I felt that I feel right now that that was my weakness, not to marry her and take them out. And I could have met my family on the other side. But being under the wing of my parents, it just seems so much easier.
Mhm.
A little bit of guilt over there, but it's kind of, you know, similar story. But yeah, it was very common. And but I know that I always wanted to leave, and I was looking for as soon as I was could reason, I was looking for ways to get out.
Mhm.
But Um, getting back to the story that I heard, and I didn't really look into it much, but I thought that it was part of the Seoul II agreement about the limit of nuclear armaments. But maybe it was started with the grain deal, but I
We
don't know.
were sold for grain pretty much.
Well,
That was, which is okay. Nothing wrong with that. It's okay.
yeah,
I'll take
I'm
it.
a commodity. I go to work.
Absolutely. But yeah, it was a result of the agreement that U.S. will sell grain if Soviet Union allows immigration.
Mhm.
And immigration, as you mentioned, it went all through the 1979,
Mhm.
peaking actually in 79 with about 50,000 people emigrated that year,
Mhm.
and stopped completely or just about completely in 1980
Yeah,
because of the Afghan,
Afghanistan.
Soviet
Yes.
Union invaded Afghanistan in December 79.
Yeah.
And at that point, Soviet Union had no reason to be nice to the West because they were already condemned for starting the war. And so all immigration stopped. That's when most people who applied in late 79, they were refused permission to leave.
Yeah, we applied in 78 and we felt that there will be a war. We thought that it would be with China, but then after we were already here and then Afghanistan broke out,
Right.
that war
Mhm.
started, we were going like, oh, well, but the feel that we were in a pre-war situation was prominent,
Mhm. Okay.
permeating the entire society, or at least as far as
Oh,
I knew it.
okay. All right. We left in 77, so that was a couple of years before you.
Mhm.
But right, once
Well,
the
we
war,
started in 78, so in 79, it took
79,
a
right.
year, right?
Right? And then immigration stopped, and so a good number of people were trapped. That's
Mhm.
the refuseniks, the ones who were refused permission to leave, and who already at that point
There was
either
plenty of
fired.
refugees during our time. I remember going to Moscow with my dad. We had to go to U.S. Embassy for
Yeah,
some stamp, and I saw the lines of people with placards, the papers,
slogans. Yeah,
let us
yeah,
go.
right. People were protesting. Right. So there were people who were refused all through the 70s.
Mhm.
Sometimes reasons were given that they had some access to classified information if they served in the army in certain units or worked at certain jobs. In one case,
I thought that it
person
was
was
across the board. If you're in the army like 10, 15 years, you were not allowed to,
there were
something like
so
that.
there was a variety of situations where people were refused. Often it was quite random, which of
Yeah,
course the purpose was to make people very nervous and fearful of applying, and
right.
that to serve as a deterrent.
Mhm.
Um, and so people, there were all through the 70s that people were refused. But then the mass refusals, that was at the start of Soviet Afghan War. And
Mhm.
so then those people remained in the Soviet Union until 1988, maybe 87, 88, when finally permissions were starting again
Mhm.
because Soviet Union got out of Afghanistan at that point, and again needed the help. Their economy was collapsing. They needed Western help,
Mhm.
and so people were again getting permissions. But refuseniks were pretty much stuck there for 10 years without their jobs. They had to find anything they could just
They
to
were
stay
starving.
alive, just to
Right.
have food.
Yeah.
There were arrests, there were oppression, they were followed, phones were bugged. There were endless stories about that. It was sort of interesting because I think sometimes these people who went through this refusal process they're viewed as heroes. And it certainly, took a huge toll on their lives. But what I find interesting is that they did not set out to be heroes. They were hoping they'll apply, they'll get permission to leave, and they'll get out of the Soviet Union and everything will be fine. And then they were stuck in this situation where they had to make an enormous effort just to survive. And how they went through that and how they came out on the other side and were allowed to immigrate 10 years later, those were amazing stories.
Yeah, I think that there's American saying something about the greatness is not something that that you set out to
Right.
achieve. It's something that happens.
Exactly. Right. It'd be easy if we set out on a quest to be great.
Right.
But yeah, no, it kind of is you're thrust into it, and how you deal with it is, they were stories, some amazing and some very sad.
Yeah, I think that all the stories in their own right, both sad and amazing, because um, everybody who went through this nonsense just had to have a certain degree of internal fortitude to be able to just to go through this ordeal.
Absolutely. Which is, by the way, the reason for the title of my book. Right, I was debating, so I was finding people to talk to and conducting interviews and writing things down. And the back of my mind was, once I realized that this is probably going to be a book and not just a little article somewhere, I was debating, so what should the title be? And I couldn't come up with anything. And then from a couple of people I interviewed, they referred to those who went through immigration, especially early on in the 70s, that they were fighters. And so I said, that's the title.
That makes sense. Again, as I said earlier, to me, and I think many of my peers, it was just something that you had to do. It's either you survive or you don't survive. So if you want to live, you have to do something about it. It was not even, it's just natural fight for survival, but I guess it is a fight. But then when we came here, I'm sure you remember it. I mean, I studied English. I came to America. I couldn't speak a word. I couldn't communicate. It took years to be able to even, feel somewhat normal. And I'm still, as you can hear, sound like I'm fresh off the boat.
No,
Still looking for the right words. Let's put it this way.
Well, that's all right.
But yeah, it doesn't bother me.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
But I do meet Americans, and I never talk to anybody in this depth. At this depth, it's just like, there's more interesting things to discuss. But they always find these little stories fascinating.
Absolutely. Right. And I think what really prompted me to write this down is exactly that the people who went through immigration themselves, they thought that's kind of the reason you don't see a lot of books on the subject. People did not write it down. There are a few memoirs that people wrote about their lives, often in Russian, and another generation and their grandchildren often don't speak Russian, so those stories will not make it there.
And speaking of that, to me, at least I think everybody of my generation or my peers, this is completely normal. So we moved to America, we made our lives, or we were making our lives without really knowing how they're going to turn out, but we did the best we could. And I guess we will continue fighting on to, make ourselves an Americans with that we wanted to become. But it seems like the new generation does not take this experience or learn this experience through osmosis, so to speak,
No, that's
by knowing
absolutely
us.
correct. That's
and
absolutely correct.
and
Mhm. Yeah, a
they
lot of people, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I'm just saying that my point is that they are no longer as, I mean, I don't think that I'm strong, but I'm wanted to survive, but they are just willing to give up at any sign or sign of difficulty.
Right,
Anything difficult, they
which
give up.
is right. So the purpose of my book was not so much for our peers, because our peers know the story. The purpose was really for children and grandchildren. And it's very true that this information did not make it to the children and grandchildren. And as I said, for whatever reason. But the grandchildren are growing up in sort of regular American schools. And their parents, the ones who came here and had to work very hard just to establish their lives here, very often did not appreciate that the schools here were indoctrinating the students just as much as the Soviet schools were. And especially elite colleges were doing even more so. And some parents, some people, they use the word inoculate, that they thought that them coming from the Soviet Union, having experienced what it's like living under socialism and communism and the anti-Semitism that went with it, they escaped from that. And then they came here and suddenly they're finding that their children are finding socialism perfectly acceptable, in fact, desirable. And so the grandparents are looking at it, how's that even possible? They left so that the grandchildren, grandchildren would be able to go to a university of their choice or be able to work at the profession of their choice. And suddenly their children and grandchildren are espousing socialism, that they escaped. And that was a very somewhat unexpected, I guess, part of the conversations that I found, that people were greatly disappointed in a lot of the times in how children and grandchildren were growing up with the espousing views that the grandparents rebelled against and escaped. So it was quite interesting. Yeah.
In your research, have you found out an answer to the following question? I told you about my great grandmother.
Mhm.
I've told you about my grandmother or grandparents.
Mhm.
You can assume that my parents were not slouches. I told you about something about myself. Where did we go wrong that our children are not like generations before us?
Well, our children are growing up in exactly where we brought them. They in a safe, nice, comfortable environment. They have never been called dirty Jews. They have never been told, we cannot accept you to a university. You understand why. They have never been denied promotions because of, well, with your last name, meaning your Jewish sounding last name, there'll be no more promotions to you, being told that outright. We created a very comfortable life for our children. And with that, they're happy to live a comfortable, safe, nice, pleasant life. And it's like a human organism. If they have to fight off illnesses, it gets stronger. If they live in a place where all the viruses are dead, it starts doing strange things. And so that's where our children are going. But not everybody. One thing I found is that families that became religious, the Jewish religious observance, the statement was made that they found that religious morality is not compatible with the leftist politics. And I asked people in general, my question was, your experience with immigration, has it affected your children's view of the world? And the religious crowd felt that their children were much more likely to follow the parents in their views of the world. So religion kept them from becoming completely comfortable and safe in.
Sounds to me like you're saying that we are bear responsibility for our children. For example, with religious people, they did something to force their children to stay in religion, to know something about religion. So,
I don't think that I would put it as it was our fault, because how can it be? I mean, whoever expected it? We send kids to school and we're told, study, how's your math, how's your physics, are you getting good grades? And things like history or things like gender studies, yeah, just get a good grade and move on. And what we didn't realize, is it our fault that we didn't realize? I don't know. Maybe looking back at it, we should have paid more attention. But who could have predicted it? That the schools were doing what the schools here were doing what the Soviet schools were doing in the Soviet Union, meaning
well,
a certain orthodoxy being pushed. I really wouldn't define it as a fault. I think the religious crowd, probably the schools were less into the latest woke policies, and more into traditional studies, and that kept the kids sort of a little bit away from the leftist things.
I see what you're saying, but how we went through indoctrination in the Soviet schools, the pinnacle of indoctrination, but look at us, they didn't succeed with us. I think the reason, at least I think that the reason that they didn't succeed with us is because, or at least in my case, I saw my parents and I saw their struggle and I saw them fighting against the system in their own way, covertly, overtly. But our children here, they see us working hard and try to overcome our shortcomings. And here we also experienced being treated as FOB, fresh off the board. So though they don't have an accent, they could take example from us.
So hopefully they will. There were plenty of examples that I heard of people growing up being real believers in communism and becoming members of a Komsomol, leading propaganda lessons or parades in the city in support of the army or government or whatever. So there was plenty of that, or people getting into the Communist Party out of conviction. That also was happening. So we're looking at ourselves and saying, okay, we turned out, we fought, we overcame, and now our children have this nice, easy life and don't want to work too hard.
So the question, in your interviews, how do people view themselves? How do they view their effort to immigrate? What do they think?
There was actually, it's an interesting question because there was also a range of views of how they viewed immigration and their part in it.
Like their legacy. What's their legacy? How they?
So legacy. So my question to people was again, sort of looking back. Well, first of all, were there any regrets about coming here? And the answer was no, of course not. Absolutely no regrets. We kind of knew that. Legacy, they viewed themselves as they have succeeded. In some cases, they succeeded. They were living well or living lifestyle of their choice. Professionally, they've done well. They succeeded. In some, there were quite a few cases when people said that, professionally they have done okay, but not as well as many other people. But they were happy that their children succeeded and were doing well. So they were quite satisfied with that. Yeah.
Well, so looking back at the experience you shared in the book, what would be most single important takeaway message that you think the reader should walk away or grasp after reading your work, probably was in regard to human spirit, resilience, and yearning for freedom, something along these lines. What do you think?
So, mhm.
What's the essence of the book? What's
So I think perhaps what I would hope that our children and grandchildren would grasp from this is, first of all, bad things happen, and it's possible to overcome them. It's possible to succeed despite difficulties around. We have done it. We have done it. People who lived through the Soviet system, through the war, and through Stalin, and through the earlier years, they succeeded. They fought in whatever way they could. They succeeded. And so you would hope that the young generation now, the one that grew up sort of very easy, nice, comfortable life that we made for them, they have encountered October 7th and the attack of Hamas on Israel. And a lot of them encountered the sudden surge of anti-Semitism directed at nice American Jews. And I think a lot of them were lost. A lot of Jewish kids were lost in that. They couldn't figure out what was going on. And I think knowing that this is not new, there were generations of Jews in other countries that went through difficult times. I'm not talking about Holocaust. I'm just talking about regular life that was difficult because they were Jews. And they succeeded. And so you would hope that perhaps, reading this, the younger generation could learn from it that, yeah, what you're experiencing is not new. We have gone through that. We have managed. You will manage also. Knowing that it has been done, knowing that it's possible to get through it, perhaps it will make them stronger. That's my hope. And,
definitely, I hope that this tragedy of October 7th would wake in them the realization of who they are and what their place in the
absolutely.
world, and will knock off this veneer that they of indoctrination that they got from school, because after all, this indoctrination is a veneer,
Yeah.
and their essence hopefully came from their parents and their family and their generations before them.
Well,
Um,
we hope so.
with that, Yanina, I do want us to thank you for coming today to share with us your thoughts, your insights, your um, truly remarkable work that you did to collect these experiences and share them with future generations and the current generation too, about this immigration from or escape from Soviet Union. Uh,
Mhm.
that many Jews, Soviet Jews, went through, and I hope that your book will be read and people would get deeper understanding of that period of time. In some cases, it would be of their past or past of their parents.
Right.
And for everyone who are listening and watching, would be sure to include Yanina's book in the podcast description so you can explore this important piece of history further and on your own.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much for coming. I hope we're going to have you back on our podcast,
Absolutely.
explore other topics.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
That's all the time we have for this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us as we explored thought-provoking topics. We hope you found it insightful and informative. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to catch future episodes where we delve into more exciting topics. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you next time.